He is a snake, this is not a human. He considered himself like a giant of sex. Well, all his thoughts boiled down to one thing: sex. He could only talk about that for hours. Yes, he is sick. Probably on that basis. He calls me from the bedroom and says there on his table lies this pin. Oh, scalpel, ink is standing there, well, some various instruments. He tells me, I decided to punish you. Choose, either I make a tattoo on your face or make it to them captive, meaning he will cut the mouth to the ears. I thought, he said to him, a tattoo. Cases about the nightmarish events that occurred in the small town of Vyatsky Polyeni are still being written about in articles, and documentary films are being shot. In Russian, English, and Japanese. For it was there from 1995 to the year that a beast in human form operated. Alexander Nikolaevich Kamin, obsessed with the idea of creating a farm of slaves for himself. Deep underground, Kamin equipped a bunker. In it, in shackles, he held 4 women and 2 men, forcing them to work 16 hours a day. But the main strangeness of Kamin was not the labor of his workers, but the sophisticated executions that he invented for his captives. His captives he poisoned with poison and executed on an electric chair. And also, Kamin dreamed of an underground kingdom in which his slave women would give birth to him 100 or 2 little slaves. Alexander Kamin is considered one of the most cruel, cunning, and inventive maniacs of the 20th century. Here, listen to his story. The future slave owner was born on July 15, 1953, in the city of Vyatsky Polyeni, Kirov region, in a family of simple workers. In childhood and youth, Kamin did not stand out among his peers. The boy studied averagely and showed no special abilities in anything. With difficulty finishing 8 classes, Alexander decided to leave school and prepare. Mino fight in which 2 people received serious injuries, and he ended up in a colony under the article for hooliganism. Serving his appointed term, Alexander with rapture listened to the stories of his cellmate, who in his time kept several homeless people in captivity, forcing the slaves to paint icons and pictures. The owner, it was sold, and he took them into account. His own vocation, he worked at the local sewing production, and his work fascinated him greatly. Finding himself free at 21 years old, Komi went to master sewing skills in a technical school, dreaming in the future to become a fashion designer. But a diploma as a fashion designer tailor did not guarantee employment. Kamin worked as an electrician, a handyman. Rum met a colleague, an engineer by education, Alexander Mikheyev. Recalling the stories of the cellmate slave owner, he proposed to Mikheyev to acquire their own slaves who would grow berries and vegetables for sale. The second source of income, Kamin planned to make breeding black cats for skins, to then make souvenirs from these skins. He said that he tells me in the basement already a little. If you help me, we will make an area, we will plant cucumbers and hand them over to restaurants, to cafes. All year round, we will have a stable salary. Slaves homeless. Well, someone. Lure to make them work. After some time, Kamin's plans changed. He decided to organize a sewing production on which his personal slaves would labor. And however, keeping the captives in the garage itself with good audibility was risky. Therefore, Kamin and Mikheyev decided to create a fortified basement under it, something like a bunker. The work took the accomplices a long 4 years. This will not be a greenhouse but a dungeon, loved to repeat Komi. The owners, neighbor accomplices tried to do this at night, but Alexander waved it off and bred nutria for sale. This legend was very liked by the wives of motorists, who often set the hardworking Kamin as an example to their husbands. By the end of 1994, the bunker at a depth of 9 meters was ready. Its area was 15 square meters, divided into several rooms. A staircase led to the premises. Kamin ran high voltage to it in case his future captives decided to escape. For better sound insulation, the accomplices lined the walls with mattresses. A little later, Komi and Mikheyev installed tables and beds in the bunker, bought 2 sewing machines and fabric, and then began searching for slaves. They looked for captives among women leading an antisocial lifestyle. One of them, 30-year-old Vera Talpiva, met Alexander Mikheyev on December 11, 1994. To her misfortune, Talpiva herself approached Mikheyev with a request to give her a cigarette. So a conversation started between them. Soon Vera agreed to drink in Alexander's company and went with him to the garage, waiting until the woman got a little tipsy. She came to, Talpiva already in the bunker, and with horror listened to the speech of Kamin and Mikheyev, who informed her, "Now you will live here in the basement and you will sew things. Understood. Verotchka? Her first reaction was an attempt to break out of captivity, but the forces were unequal. After that, to subdue the rebellious slave, Kamen repeatedly beat her with a rubber hose and iron chains, and also raped her and constantly threatened her. Soon the captive was so intimidated that she agreed to all conditions. Only sewing did not work out for her at all. No matter how much Kamen taught Talpiva to work on the machine, nothing worthwhile came out. Then Alexander demanded that Vera recommend one of her acquaintances as a slave, and Tulpa told him that her friend was engaged in sewing. To the market, Komi went there in January 1995 and suddenly ran into one of his former cellmates, Nikolai Malik. By coincidence, he turned out to be the cohabitant of Melnikova. Komi offered Nikolai to drink to the meeting at his garage, and he agreed, taking his girlfriend with him. Together with, in the bunker they smoked. Komi tells me, "You don't remember me? We worked together," he says. I say, "I don't remember." He says, "In such and such year." I say, "I don't remember you." He says, "Well, let's drink to acquaintance a little." The glass was already poured. The time was without 10 to 8. I drank the little glass. I remember nothing more. I came to already below. Talpiva entered there. He enters, asks her, "Is this her?" She says yes. All her lover Kolya Malik they considered too dangerous to leave alive. The man was stripped to his underwear and taken to the nearest field. His clothes the accomplices scattered nearby to make it look like, in a state of psychosis, he himself undressed and fell asleep in a snowdrift. The frozen body. Several days later, random passers-by stumbled upon it and reported the find to the police. Kamen's plan worked. The death of Malik, who always had a craving for alcohol, did not interest the policemen. They wrote it off as an accident, got drunk and froze. Meanwhile, Kamen processed Melnikova in the old way. The woman, exhausted by tortures, soon broke and began to sew robes and underwear. She had to work up to. In the meantime, the captive Talpiva was busy equipping the bunker. In case of disobedience, Komi promised to cut with a knife his captives. Komi practically did not feed them. The diet consisted mainly of cereals, potatoes, black bread, and rosehip infusion. And not every day. To survive, Talpiva and Melnikova often had to fry potato peels. The captives washed once a week in a basin. For this, Komi, with the help of a winch, lowered a canister with water into the basement for them. Water we also had a flask for a week. We needed to wash somehow and cook. We also went to the toilet right there. Went to a small room, spread paper, relieved oneself. This all wraps up, you put in a bag. The bag fills up, you tie it. Maybe it stands there for a week, depending on who how went. This bag he then took and carried out upstairs. We poured into the flask. This flask stood maybe a week, maybe 2, maybe more. All this accumulated, we carried it ourselves. He lifted it on the winch. This all meanwhile the clothes that Melnikova sewed were in great demand at the local market, and then Kamen with Mikhaev decided to expand production. But for this they needed male strength, and Tommy proposed to bring their old acquaintance to the bunker, who drank a lot, lost his housing, and was glad for any roof. Kamen received a detailed description of the appearance and went to look for the potential slave at the local market, but made a mistake and brought another person to the garage. So 37-year-old Yevgeny Shishev appeared in the bunker. The man had a strong build, had served in the airborne forces in his time, but then became addicted to the bottom. He himself descended into the bunker. Kamen convinced him that he would pay well for feasible help. Finding himself in a trap, Shishev agreed to put on shackles, and at the same time reported that he was a skilled electrician. He didn't even think that, with this revelation, he was signing his own death warrant. Komi immediately realized that the captive could easily turn off the power to the stairs and get rid of Shishev. The maniac tied the captive to a chair, allowed him to smoke his last cigarette, then wrapped bare wires around his arm and leg, and ordered his captives to press the buttons attached to the device switches. Melnikova, even under threat of death, refused to fulfill the demand. But Talpiva executed Kamen's order. From a powerful electric shock, Yevgeny Shishev died instantly. A helper was needed to trade, it was necessary with products and to dig. And this Vera proposed to me. She began to drip on my brain. In general, come on, she says, I will help you work together. They will sew, I will trade. And everything. And at this time Genya appeared. They brought him. And she said, if you don't believe me that I will work with you, come on. She says, I will kill him so that you don't doubt me that I didn't know about this. They brought the apparatus called Genya from the bedroom, put him on a collar, tied his hands, tied his legs, attached wires, and themselves went out. At this time, he turned on this apparatus the first time. Then the second time, he managed to inhale, and Talpiva, on the contrary, became his favorite. He even let Vera go free so that she would search and bring a new victim to the garage. The woman on whose conscience was Shishev's death, finding herself free, not only did not go to the police but also clearly fulfilled Kamen's order. On July 16, 1995, Talpiva returned to the garage in the company of a 20-year-old, Bezra, that had recently been released from a colony where she served time for petty theft. And before that she worked as a cook. Vera Talpiva came to visit me. Before that she was wanted for half a year. "Do you need money?" she asked. I said of course yes. She told me, "Come, I will introduce you to one person who will let you earn." At that time there was rain, the rain was very heavy, it was dark here. Then we went out there in some box and I say, "Vera, look, the light is on. Maybe this garage." We came out from that side, past, and exactly. She says this garage. We approached the garage with her, this one. Number 198. The door was opened by Kamen, he came out. She said, "Here, please meet. This is the very person who will offer you a job." Then we went into the garage, sat down. He took out a bottle, 3 glasses. At that time, Vera stepped aside under me. I had to turn around. When I already turned around, the glasses were already poured. I drank the glass, remember nothing more. And then I ended up in the bunker. Ending up in the bunker, Kazakova, like the other captives, was beaten. But this did not break her. She constantly tried to resist and even protected her friend in misfortune, Tatiana Melnikova. To her, Kazakova made a homemade amulet wrapped in polyethylene, a note with a prayer. And learning that the exhausted by slavery Melnikova planned to take her own life, Kazakova dissuaded her from the fatal step, promising that she would organize an escape. With descending into the bunker, Kazakova seized the moment and locked him in one of the rooms, and herself together with her friend tried to escape. But Komi broke down the door and grabbed the women climbing the stairs. A terrible punishment awaited them. To such a degree he beat me that he himself was all in blood. Splashes of blood, the skin burst. Then he took a hose, then he led naked, then he friend. But these cruel tortures infuriated Kamen even more. It seemed little to him. He proposed to Kazakova and Melnikova a punishment of choice. Either cut their mouths from ear to ear or tattoo the word slave on their foreheads. The frightened women chose the second option, and the maniac disfigured their faces with tattoos. The tattoos of the slaves healed for a long time and festered. And Kamen, so that escape attempts would not repeat, attached shackles to the walls of the bunker. From now on, before descending into the basement, he signaled with a lamp. After that, the captives had to fasten the shackles on their necks and hands, and then put the keys on the table. Once, room they closed me in that door, and the door was not closed, which was the main door to the corridor. Well, they ran there. I already caught up with them in this corridor. Here I punished them for this, of course, severely. He worked there with a stake, I think, and washed the floor. We buried the door was open and ran. Opened that iron door, and that door I couldn't open the second because there was no handle on it, nothing. He caught us and dragged us back, put on collars and beat to half-death and went home. But once Kamen suffered a disappointment. He sent his assistant Talpiva to search for another captive, but she suddenly disappeared. Therefore, the new slave, Orem 96th year Kamen, brought to the garage a 27-year-old. Sonoil, the maniac's factory, moved to a new level. In addition to robes, his captives now sewed vestments for priests, and also wove icons and coats of arms. Kamen even tried to sell a canvas with a coat of arms first to the local administration, and then did not fear to approach the leadership of the police of Vyatsky Polyeni with such a proposal. But everywhere he received a refusal. The potential customers had no money. Then, to increase income, Komi decided to connect his slaves to growing cucumbers in a greenhouse. He installed a greenhouse in the bunker, organized electric heating, and received the first harvest of vegetables. But soon the owner of the neighboring garage, in a conversation with Kamen, mentioned the unbearable heat, because of which even the potatoes stored with him sprouted. After that, the maniac decided not to risk and dismantled the greenhouse. By the way, the shadow earnings did not prevent Kamen from registering at the labor exchange and receiving unemployment benefits. In January 1997, in the runaway Talpiva with whom Komi accidentally collided on the street. He pretended to be glad for the meeting with her and proposed to the former accomplice to return to the business. Moreover, Kamen promised Talpiva to make her the sales manager. Delighted by such prospects, the woman agreed, not even suspecting that Kamen for the escape on Talpiva could become her attempt to blackmail Kamen. She allegedly demanded a decent sum of money for silence about his dark deeds. Otherwise, the woman threatened to go to the police. Whatever it was, Talpiva awaited a terrible death. Kamen tortured her for a long time, beat her, pulled out teeth with pliers, and stuck needles under her nails, and then ordered the other captives to inject her with brake fluid. They somehow couldn't hit the vein, and then the exhausted Talpiva proposed to drink the poison herself. According to the captives' memories, Vera died in agony for 15 hours. After her death, Kamen and Mikhaev dumped the body of the deceased into an ice hole on the Vyatka River. Kamen came, said that today you Vera will die. She says, "Come on, better I die of hunger." He says, "No, I don't need you." On the collar on the table they poured antifreeze. She drank. It became little for her, then poured more. She still doesn't die, asked more. She drank like some compote and snacked with bread, and somewhere around 11 she began to lose consciousness, asked to eat. The next victim of Kamen became his lover Tatiana Nazimova. To her mental illness was added a physical one. She fell ill with leukemia and by the end of the year of life in the bunker could no longer get out of bed. By mid-March 1997, the maniac planned to get rid of Nazimova, but Tatiana Kazakova stood up for her defense. She argued that because of her mental peculiarities, she would tell no one anything. Kamen thought about it and decided to find out how adequately Nazimova assessed what was happening. She trustingly told the maniac that she was at cutting and sewing courses led by teacher Alexander Kamen. After that, Nazimova's fate was decided. Maniac, naked, in the machine antifreeze, the body of the deceased Kamen decided to load on a sled and drag under the cover of night right to the doors of the local morgue. The idea that the employees of the institution would find the deceased right at the doors amused the killer. However, Kamen did not reach the destination. Noticing a random passerby at the exit from the cooperative, he abandoned the burden and ran away. But let's go back. At the end of 1996, a new captive appeared in Kamen's bunker, 22-year-old Irina Ganyushkina, whom shortly before her death Talpiva brought. Ganyushkina tried to engage in entrepreneurship at the local market but extremely unsuccessfully. The girl lost a large sum of money taken on debt. At the same time, Irina's personal life was going well. She was going to move in with her young man. On the fateful day for herself, Ganyushkina was going to look at a rental apartment whose hostess was her neighbor Vera Talpiva. Eva. Listening to the girl's story about her debts, Talpiva proposed to Ganyushkina to go to the garage to her acquaintance Alexander Komi. Talpiva promised that he would lend Irina the necessary sum of money. However, instead of that, he drugged the vodka with clonidine. The girl ended up in the bunker. I couldn't understand where I was. At first I thought I was riding a train. Here then I got up, came out. There these women are sitting with tattoos. I began to ask where I am. They somehow didn't want to say. Then I say, let me go. Well, open the door for me, I need to go home. We say closed from that side, he will come. They say, well, this man, who with legs informed the new slave. But hope for salvation appeared in Irina when Kamen's accomplice Alexander Mikhaev descended into the basement. The captive knew him from childhood. Ganyushkina began to beg the acquaintance to help her. But he not only refused but also raped the captive. Meanwhile, the new captive liked Kamen. Well, 88 March 1997, the maniac, striving to please the girl, brought a treat to the bunker and organized a festive table for his captives. The maniac's sympathy for Irina was immediately noticed by Kazakova. Waiting until Komi left, she proposed to Nyushna to be kinder to him to lull his vigilance. She obeyed her friend in misfortune and began to show signs of attention to Kamen and even dedicated herself. With tears. This continued every day. I say that we got used to this to such a degree it was already all the same to us. We knew now Sasha will come, and they will go there we won't see for a long time. All the working day we work they make love in another room in this bedroom. And so that he could see us, suppose I go there, suppose he put a mirror on the washstand. If I go to this room where they make love there, he will see me in the mirror. Well, what should I say, that she fucked there, or what at all? She didn't work. She waited for Sasha. She would rather Sasha come, worried when he was late until 12 at night. And we work at this time. Tatiana Kazakova's plan succeeded. Komi was enchanted by the new one and let her go. The maniac even tried to artificially inseminate the captive using a syringe with his sperm. Ganyushkina listened with horror to common stories about his plans. He was going to create an underground slave-owning farm underground, gathering hundreds of women who would give birth and raise slaves for him. First he said that T years 3, but she couldn't get pregnant. Here he decided to do it with this syringe. I began to dissuade him. She was simply scared that there might be some consequences there. He persuaded me for a long time. I didn't agree, but he set a condition for me that if when he takes me from there, then in freedom they will do it to me. I agreed. After some time, the girl managed to convince the maniac that she couldn't carry a child in the bunker. 197-year Komi kicked out from his apartment on Lenin Street the previous cohabitant and settled Irina Yushki there. In the process of work, I in general fell in love with Irina, loved her, decided to let go, decided to get married with, but he was not going to trust the girl. Kamen never let us Malone and Davo her in accompaniment of Alexander. Once they met the girl's parents on the street, and her tormentor immediately asked them for blessing on the marriage. He presented himself as an electrician working at the local hospital. Ganyushkina's mother and father gave their consent without even suspecting that at that moment a sharpening was pressed into their daughter's side. Cool. 2-year-old Nastia, daughter from previous relationships, Irina quickly understood that the child would become a hostage who would deprive her of chances to escape, but it turned out otherwise. On July 21, 1997, he allowed Irina alone to take the child to the pediatrician, and he himself went on business. Shortly before that, the maniac told Yushki that the slaves bored him and he was going to get rid of them together with the bunker. Irina understood that she couldn't delay. He just left the house. I got ready, got Nastia ready, he left me money and ran to the stop. At first I was afraid maybe he wants to check me somewhere. Standing there, nothing normal came to the police, began to tell, and no one believes me, recalled. IRI escorted to the office of a familiar operative. There the woman began to list the surnames of all the captives and immediately recognized the slaves in the photographs under the glass on the table. Talpiva, Melnikova, and Kazakova were listed as missing without a trace. True, the law enforcers did not particularly search for the women, considering the lifestyle of the missing. The law enforcers decided that they went on a binge. Soon an operative group arrived at Kamen's garage. Yushkina warned the policemen that the staircase leading to the bunker is under high voltage, and therefore they decided to set up an ambush and wait for the garage owner. As soon as Kamen appeared, they immediately twisted him. The policeman, he categorically denied that slaves labor in the bunker under the garage and kept silent that the staircase leading there is under voltage. Then one of the operatives reported that now he would descend down, and if he dies, Alexander will be tried for the death of a police officer. The maniac got scared and immediately de-energized the staircase. The freed women were led out of the basement in dark blindfolds. Over the years of captivity, their eyes had become unaccustomed to daylight. We lived like in a grave, recalled the captives. Kamen's accomplice Mikhaev was soon detained. He began to justify himself that he helped Kamen only because he threatened to kill his wife and children. However, this did not save the maniac's accomplice from 20 years of imprisonment. Of them, Mikhaev served 18 years in Kirovo-Chepetsk Correctional Colony No. 11 and then moved to live in Moscow. I wanted to apologize. That too. Cool, no? Execution, instead of which he received a life sentence. I regret that my son and I didn't have a wedding. I didn't marry her, didn't finish to the end. Hear this all, he lamented after the verdict. The 40-year-old maniac did not wait for dispatch to the zone, and soon after the trial took his own life in the isolator. It turned out that his last resting place Kordom. Layer. Tatya. Coco, however, the maniac himself imagined the place of his last refuge somewhat differently. Underground city, he said, I will make that there will be a huge number of people. I will make myself a coffin with glass windows and my children will come and look at me. Pump out the air from the coffin and I will always. Serm plant as a symbol, he says. Apple Komi, his accomplice Mikhaev, Irina Nikina changed her surname and forever left Vyatsky Polyeni, and the freed Tatiana Melnikova and Tatiana Kosko never managed to adapt to normal life. For the first time, the women tried to look for work, but because of the stigma on their faces, no one wanted to take them. They were forced to get food for themselves at dumps. About 7 years, two Tatianas lived in freedom. Died of heart failure. On this I have everything. If the video was interesting to you, support us with a like and don't forget to subscribe. Until new meetings.